Let's start Art and Literature Part 2 with some short snappers. Sarah Fuller Flower Adams was a British poet. She is best known for writing Nearer, My God, to Thee, the hymn played by the ship's orchestra during the sinking of the Titanic. John Greenleaf Adams is also known for music. He compiled 2 hymnals for the Universalist Church. Thomas Gould Appleton was the brother-in-law of Unitarian Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Tom encouraged the courtship, which took years of persistence by Longfellow. Tom, also known as T.G., was born rich. Actually, we'll see his father in a later show. He was a minor artist and writer, a bon vivant, and a celebrated wit. That did not please his father, who wanted him in the business, but his good nature and generosity did please almost everyone else. Ralph Waldo Emerson called him the king of clubs. He loved to travel and spent years crisscrossing the Atlantic. 2 quotes. More and more the world needs and learns to value its vacation. And good Americans, when they die, go to Paris. I'm not sure if that second quote was inspired by the can-can, newly invented in the 1840s. Tom was a patron of the arts. His legacy is his contributions to the Boston Public Library and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. William Francis Allen, another Harvard graduate, was a professor of ancient languages, but he is best known as the co-editor of The Collection of Slave Songs, published 1867, the first anthology of its kind. Jane Andrews was a 19th century children's author, and I am completely in love with the titles of her books. The Stories Mother Nature Told Her Children, 10 Boys Who Lived on the Road from Long Ago to Now, and The 7 Little Sisters Who Float on the Round Ball That Floats in the Sky. Horatio Alger, Jr. was a Harvard man and the son of a Harvard man. He was a Unitarian minister and the son of a Unitarian minister, but his first and last parish on Cape Cod didn't last long. Horatio was a homosexual, which was a problem in the 1860s. He liked boys as well as men, which is still a problem today. I don't know how far he went, but he freaked out 2 teenagers who complained about him. The scandal was hushed up on condition that he leave the ministry, which he did. The cover-up was successful. We know about the incident because he talked in 1870 to American psychologist William James, and it was confirmed because the parish records were made public in the 1970s. There is no record that the behavior was ever repeated. Horatio had always been a writer on the side. In 1864, he wrote his first book for boys and his first bestseller, Frank's Campaign. It's about a boy growing up on the home front during the Civil War, which is exactly what his readers were doing at the time. After Cape Cod, he moved to New York City and started writing the books for which he's famous, Rags to Riches stories, celebrating the American dream, in which boys rise from street urchins to middle-class respectability in 100 to 200 pages. There's 200 million copies in print. New York had over 60,000 abandoned or neglected children in the 1870s. Horatio did not just write about them, he knew them, hopefully not in the biblical sense. He supported the 5 Points Mission, the YMCA, the Children's Aid Society, and the Newsboys Lodging House. He also informally adopted 2 boys off the street. If there were shenanigans, they never told. Groucho Marx said, Horatio Alger's books conveyed a powerful message to me and many of my young friends, that if you worked hard at your trade, the big chance would eventually come. As a child, I didn't regard it as a myth, and as an old man, I think of it as the story of my life. As one critic wrote in the year 2000, those who care about the future of the city's poor should re-examine Alger's message. It worked once, and it could work again. Conrad Aiken won a Pulitzer Prize for his collection Selected Poems in 1930. I'm sorry to say I did not find one that I liked, but thousands of people love him. Now, some of my fellow Canadians may remember Ralph Allen. He was born in Winnipeg, raised in Saskatchewan, and spent World War II as a war correspondent for the Toronto Globe and Mail. He joined Maclean's magazine in 1946 and became editor in 1950. For the last 2 years of his life, 64 to 66, he worked at the Toronto Star. He also authored several books with Canadian themes, both fiction and non-fiction. Sorry about that. Melvin Arnold was the director of Beacon Press from 1945 to 56. He's not famous. He wasn't in Wikipedia when I last checked, but Beacon Press's own history says his tenure was the start of their modern era. Beacon Press, founded in 1854, is the Unitarian Universalist Association's publishing house. Catholics have the Vatican Press, Anglicans have Church House Publishing, Lutherans have Augustus Fortress, Concordia, and Northwestern. We have Beacon Press. In 1945, Beacon Press was a dusty affair, publishing 2 hymnals and some old books on transcendentalism. Mel added books by modern intellectuals such as Alfred North Whitehead, John Dewey, Lord Acton, Bronislaw Malinowski, and Henry Steele Commager. We'll be seeing much more of Beacon Press, not least because they were the original publishers of the Pentagon Papers. Steve Allen was apparently a member of the UU Church of Los Angeles. They don't brag about it, and only a couple of sites mention it, but he has spoken there, and he's a great fit, a freethinker and humanist who wrote books about his disagreements with more traditional religions. Steve Allen is best known as a comedian and a TV and radio personality. He started in local Los Angeles radio in the 1940s, becoming hugely popular for his ad-libs and reaching a national audience in 1950 as a summer replacement for the comedy Our Miss Brooks. That Christmas, CBS gave him a daytime show, The Steve Allen Show. In 1954, he moved to NBC as the first host of The Tonight Show, the show that later made Johnny Carson and Jay Leno famous. I guess I'm dating myself. He occasionally acted as well, including the roles of Benny Goodman and George Gershwin. Steve himself was a musician and composer, winning a Grammy for his jazz composition Gravy Waltz. He loved jazz, but not rock and roll. He let Elvis Presley sing on TV before Ed Sullivan did, but only to lampoon him. The song was, I think you guessed it, Hound Dog. Steve also wrote more than 50 books, several mystery novels, joke books and advice to would-be comics, TV reminiscences, and a biography. Also, books as a scientific skeptic, including Dumpth, The Lost Art of Thinking. He showed a similar spirit in his award-winning PBS show Meeting of Minds, a mock talk show with guests like Socrates, Emily Dickinson, and Attila the Hun. As much as possible, the guests' original words were used, but the scripts were carefully built to give a semblance of spontaneous discussion. Steve had 4 children and 2 wives, Dorothy Goodman for 9 years and TV actress Jane Meadows for life. At age 78, he died as he had lived, gently and with humor. A car backed into him in what seemed to be a minor traffic accident. Steve got out of his car and said, "What some people will do to get my autograph." Unfortunately, his injuries were much more serious than he believed. Broken ribs had pierced his heart. He died at his son's house later that day. The family chose an unmarked grave, but you can instead visit his 2 stars for radio and for TV at Hollywood and Vine. Margot Adler is best known as a New York journalist for National Public Radio. Wikipedia lists some of her stories: the death penalty, the right to die movement, the response to the war in Kosovo, computer gaming, the drug ecstasy, geek culture, children and technology, and Pokemon. She did in-depth coverage of New Yorkers' responses to 9/11. In addition to her UU faith, Margot was a Wiccan priestess. In 1979, she published the first popular book on American modern neo-pagan nature religions. For years, it was the only book out there explaining that Wicca was not the same as devil worship.